Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. Today I'm being rejoined by David James Rodriguez, and we're going to talk about homeschooling and, in particular, voluntary learning and morality training. And there's a whole world of discussion in those points, and we'll definitely pick them apart in our time ahead. Before David will bring us up to speed with what he's been up to lately since our last talk, maybe a month ago, just one announcement concerning apocatastasis, and that is an invitation to check out my recent recording and poster with Angela Malik and her music training. So she has all sorts of background, both professionally and in the classroom, with music teaching and singing and chant and so forth. And you can find out all about that and our collaboration here at Apocatastasis by checking out our main page. Also, you'll see in our time ahead with David, we're going to alternate between the proper title, voluntary learning, etc., and David's link tree. This link tree will be in the description down below as well. And you can find all of David's different websites there. And as someone who has a certain foot in social media, it's amazing how quickly the different websites can get out of hand in terms of you almost forget about certain websites. There's so many of these things you have to keep up with. So these Linktree uh, unifying sites are very, very helpful. So check out David's there. He has all sorts of good things in that. So with that, David, welcome. How you been?
All is well, John. Grateful to be alive. How are you, sir?
Good, good. It's a very wet afternoon here in Connecticut. We're a few hours difference between us, and we're certainly getting our rain in for hopefully a very green and very warm summer. So we're getting all of the rainy days out of the way.
Very nice. Yeah, the summer solstice is upon us, I believe. And I don't know much about the astrology. I'm learning, but the planting and learning about fruit trees and vegetables. The seasons are very important, so we're learning about these things.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we've had a guest on the show a few times, Emily Trinkus, and she's quite a whip with astrology. We'll have to get you in touch with her background there. It's a very interesting study for certain.
Yes, and I always get the words confused, astrology and astronomy. So I hope your audience will have some grace for me.
Of course. Well, at one point they were the same thing, weren't they? So I guess we can give each other a break there. But David and I had spoken about a month ago on homeschooling in general. And today, I suppose our conversation will continue in its general focus. Perhaps our discussions will develop to a particular focus on homeschooling lights, as we used to say, homeschooling authors of days gone by. But for today, we're going to still stay in that general milieu, looking at voluntary learning and morality training. And that's something that really impressed me about David in his previous discussions, not just here, but with other people, and then our own private discussions and our talk last month, is that focus on morality. Because without that internal discipline, one could really create a monster. And voluntary learning can be grand, and I want to hear David's maybe definition of that, and we can go from there. But the morality, I won't even say it balances it out, but it brings the voluntary learning to another level. I think is a better simile to things. So, David, what would you say is voluntary learning as you envision it, and how might that be applied in a particular family?
Voluntary learning is the natural process of acquiring information and learning about yourself and pursuing the higher questions in life without any coercion. And I consider voluntary learning the future of education in general, just because over the last 100+ years with the coercive schooling system, it actually is anti educational, in my view, because as learning beings, which I believe we all are, we want to pursue the questions. We want to find out the mysteries of life and ourself. The highest, or maybe the first principles of philosophy is to know thyself. And so without the freedom to explore, you have somebody else telling you what to learn, what to study. And as someone who has survived government school, which is compulsory. I barely made it out because I just felt something was wrong. But as I graduated high school and even college and had a little bit of time to pursue, I'm like, man, there's so much that they didn't expose me to. And I think now young people and parents with young kids, I think you'd be wise to pursue the questions again of, what are we doing here? Where did we come from? What's going on here on the planet? And pursue these things, of goodness, beauty, truth, and these higher ideals. And that opens up so many possibilities to pursue the paths to those endeavors. And then I think, as I gave the definition in our last show, an education is what you do to yourself to create a good life. And you need that freedom to pursue these higher principles and values. And so voluntary learn, I think, is everything for the future for the smart people. And of course, the state will continue their coercion for their own interests, unfortunately. But voluntary learn is exciting. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. You don't need grades. You don't need evaluations from others. You have self-assessment, self-evaluation, and you get to pursue learning for its own reward rather than some external validation.
Good. Thank you for that. And if there's a slight delay between my responses to David, it's simply because I've muted things for the sake of audio quality. So everyone, if you would kindly humor me with that slight technical hiccup. But yes, thank you for that, David. And you mentioned this expression, which we've heard for 3,000 years with the philosophers and so forth, the good life, education, learning. This is for the good life. How would you define that? What might that be in a very, I mean, that's a abstract idea, I suppose, but as a general working idea, what would that be?
A good life for me is when you can sleep at night, when you like yourself, when you like the waking up in the morning, and whether you have a lot of people around you or you're more introverted or you have a lot of money or a little money, all these things are immaterial to the existence of you and I and the listeners right now. This body, this consciousness is a big deal. And it took me many years to discover that because I did have some small success with some insurance company within a company I sold in my 20s, and I saw these guys making a lot of money, some of them upwards of 60 $70,000 a month. And I'm like, that's awesome. But then as I got to spend time with them, nice guys, kind guys, but I didn't feel like they have a vigor for life. And some of my heroes and mentors are full of energy and full of enthusiasm up until their 80s and 90s, and maybe even their hundreds. They just are grateful for this existence and grateful to God or whatever they believe. And I think that is one of the best results of education, is that you enjoy yourself, you enjoy your life, you like what you've created. And I guess the caveat is you take full responsibility for life, and that's kind of hard when there's a lot of corporations or other entities out there that have power and money and all these things, but that's all external versus the internal. So I think self-respect, self-love, self-esteem, these kind of things, joy for life, are the some of the questions that it took me a while to find. And again, reading and going to seminars and different things, not government school or college, unfortunately, but I think feeling good about this existence, feeling good about who you are. And some of us, we're dealt a bad hand of life. I understand that. But like Viktor Frankl said in the Man's Search for Meaning, there's a space between the circumstance and how you react or how you respond. And that is the actual response you choose to give. You get to think about how you want to respond. It's not necessarily a conditioned reflex like BF Skinner or some of those guys would want. We're not animals, I don't believe. I believe we are a creation of God or something bigger than that, where we were given consciousness. So we have this ability to think, and that ability to think is very precious and sacred. So to have a good life, I think, is to use your mind correctly, to make your mind serve you rather than you serving the mind, which is often have all these programs from the media and the corporations and advertising and such.
Thank you for that. Yes. And as I threatened last time around, I'll threaten again. We must lasso you here with your background in insurance. Here in Connecticut, we have the center of the world insurance industry in Hartford. So you have that background there. So I smile at that. But something else I smile at too is you mentioned the gentleman you had acquaintance with in business were nice guys. I remember a very influential teacher in my life. Um, when I was much, much younger, and I'd said, "Oh, so and so is such a nice person." I remember very laconically, he said, "Yes, John, they're all very nice people." And I never forgot that. Everyone's a nice person. Um, but you mentioned parents earlier, David, and part of this too is this model of schooling, which we know is not inherently the same as education, though ideally one would assist the other. This idea of modern schooling, Rockefeller schooling, as I might call it, or compulsory schooling, as you've used the expression, um, it's been around for a stretch. And I think part of this interesting chapter in learning, let's say, is the fact that it's not just young students that we're looking at, college age and below, but also parents and yes, even grandparents have to undo a great deal of conditioning, I suppose, to use the Skinner expression or the Skinner focus, conditioning. And that produces all sorts of challenges and opportunities and so forth. And I wonder, has that come up in your own work with education? This focus that it's not just the present generation who are in the seats and so forth, and in the classrooms and so forth, but also their parents, their grandparents, and has that consciousness come up? And what might you say to that in terms of this chapter of education and the difficulties and challenges it poses?
Yeah, well, the intergenerational impact of schooling, I think, has greatly affected the children and even having conversations, because now we're at a point where YouTube, AI are way more educational, in my view, than most college degrees. However, our parents were told, you got to get a college degree, it sets you apart. And then our grandparents, and my grandfather told me when he was in his late 80s, the biggest regret of his entire life was that he never got a college degree. And that conversation came up because I was going to drop out of college and take a leave of absence, and I could come back. I was doing business, and I said, "Man, if you're 9 years old and that's your big regret, and I'm just two years away from finishing paper," and he was happy that I got the piece of paper, but in terms of making a difference in my life, it really didn't. So this idea of just passing along the uh, the stories from the past, and I think I mentioned the story of the ham story in the previous interview. Chopping off the ends of the ham. If not, I can reiterate that. You can check back, but basically, the daughter says, "Hey, why did we cut off the ends of the ham?" The mom says, "I don't know. Go ask your grandmother." The grandmother says, "Oh, when we were younger, the oven was this small, so we had to chop off the ends of the ham to fit in there." So it just keeps on repeating and duplicating itself, and nobody knows what's going on. And I think we're getting to the point now, which I call a conscious awakening. Some people call it different things: a great self-ownership awakening, a truth awakening, moral awakening. These things where, like, we've been asleep and we've had the blinders on, and we're only focusing down here at maybe getting a job, or having the career, which are great endeavors, but humanity's in deep trouble. And we've seen with the military industrial complex, and even the school industrial complex, the pharmaceuticals, all these things are based on ignorance of unwitting, unknowingly participating in this program. And even goes to the vaccine agenda. So it's like they just do what they're told, and they don't understand there's financial incentives, and institutional survivability is a critical component of things. So it's really taking a step back to look at the bigger picture. And now it's time to question things. It doesn't mean you have to disregard your traditions or your family values or even your religions if you don't want to. But we are getting to that point where We want to know, why do we do this, and is there a better way? And I think in all areas, the cell phones have evolved, and computers and technology and music and all these things. But then the school system seems to be stuck in 1905, or wherever it is when it's compulsory in your state. And it's because it has an agenda for the mega corporations, for consumers and such. So it has come up. I don't dress it because it's such a larger conversation. I can talk with you because you're in this world as well, and well read and researched. But it is a big issue for parents to understand, why are we doing this? And as one of the great poets from Italy taught me, he said, um, educated people question their deepest beliefs. They challenge their deepest assumptions, because you want to know if you're being led astray, or if you're really on the path to truth. And as who was it? Oscar Wilde said. He said, if you're gonna tell someone the truth, make sure you make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. So we're attached to our own ideas of truth. And as an educated person out there, I invite you to open up your mind and say, you know what, if I am on the wrong track, I do want to know about it, instead of, regret on your deathbed and say, man, I've been duped. And I'm still, young and going for it in vigor. But I'm like, man, I've been duped too. So what else have I been duped about? And I should pursue these things with an open mind, and knowing that I'm a lot more ignorant than intelligent in terms of knowledge and such. And hey, I could be wrong, and maybe I am mistaken, versus this is it, this is the only way. And so if there's some other better way of than voluntary learning, I'm open to it. But all I can see is there's either coercive learning, forced learning, or voluntary learning. And voluntary learning seems to be the best way.
Thank you for that, David. I remember from Oscar Wilde another saying. He was very good for sayings. I must uh, declare. He said that the reward for living a double life, or the reward for wearing a mask, is that you become what you wear.
Mm,
And I think that's in De Profundis, which he wrote at the end of his life. And um, I have an idea here. I don't know if it's much of a question. If you have anything to add to it, I would certainly welcome it. But for the audience, um, I'm impressed, and I have a certain interest and background with history. A few things about the nature of the human being, and then just recent history since the past couple hundred years. Um, One of which is the human being um, has this individual soul and individuality, and yet the human being is a social animal as well. And as the Musketeers remind us, when we work together, all for one, one for all. When we work together as a species, we tend to be much more active and much more successful when we can discipline ourselves in a community. And one of the things we're really dealing with now, and this is like the pendulum. This is, I guess, human nature is in operation. Is most people seem to do well and to learn well and to do many things in a group. In fact, I think there's some ratio, and God knows if this is true or not, but that 80% of people are followers and 20% are leaders, and we can quibble about the number, but it does seem that there is a nature of leaders and followers and a certain ratio there. Laying that out, it would seem that when compulsory education, Rockefeller education, mass education, public education, whatever language we have, when this came around, it was at a time when there was a lot of trust in various social institutions. And that had been building for probably 200 years by the early 20th century. Um, and and that in the past 100 years, for all sorts of reasons, has shifted. And we're seeing a great skepticism about the state, about religion, about schools, and so forth. And again, this is just an idea. I don't know if it's much of a question, but where we're at now, it's almost like we've bottomed out, at least here in America. um, we've almost bottomed out in terms of having skepticism about institutions. And we're having to learn everything again. We're having to learn so much, whether that's just things about physicality, things about nature, things about interpersonal communication. And it's just an interesting moment, I think, and we're almost down at rock bottom where we're back to our families and having to appreciate these things, and and yet, if this is true, and if my pendulum is correct, and this is my final point, eventually things will build a certain momentum, um, where we will want to go back to greater sophistication. So that was just something you had mentioned that your response had impressed on me just now. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that
Yeah,
historical analysis.
sure. I would say that truth is simple and lies are complicated. And so if we're approaching a subject matter or a project or something and it's hard to understand, it's very possible that the person teaching that to you, they don't understand it from the simple first principles or basics. And that's kind of for me, I come from a small town, and like three gas stations, three traffic lights, you wave at your neighbor, very picturesque type place. So when I go to the city, that's like, wow, look at all this stuff going on here. It's a different world. So I like the simplicity of things because I can understand that. And I remember being a child and asking questions, and I would listen. I'll be 8 years old, 10 years old, and just ask questions. And I'm like, that person didn't answer my question. So I guess they don't know, or I didn't have the tools to put it together. But now I know that's probably the case. They were just kind of repeating what they've been told, and they didn't do the personal research or the intellectual deep dive that is hard. It is hard to read and analyze and understand that there's agendas at play, and every great writer or speaker or presenter that you see isn't necessarily coming from a loving moral place truth. Sometimes there's corporate agenda. So I try to go back to the simplicity of life, and that's even one of my affirmations now is I simplify my life and I help other people simplify their life, because there's so many distractions, there's so much confusion, and it's like, well, what do I do? And sometimes if you're too confused, you just shut down and you don't pursue the path that you are actually sincerely pursuing, because there's too much information. So I guess it's kind of just about kind of identifying what you're interested in and pursuing it simply, rather than go for all this complex things, when in truth life is very simple and it's very complicated, depends on what you choose to make of it.
Great, thank you for that, David. For certain, for certain. And there is an X factor as we're talking on this first stretch here about voluntary learning. There is an X factor I might throw to you. So we've all noticed this. You do have squirrels in California. Squirrels, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. We do in Connecticut as well, and probably in between. Um, Squirrels will run out into the road, and unlike other animals, they will stop and they will hesitate, and sometimes they will avoid the car that they are hesitating looking at, and sometimes they won't. But whether it's the squirrels or deers or whatnot, um, animals clearly don't know how to interact with roads, because roads
Mm,
hit them at a they can't adjust. Okay, that's who
mm,
they are, and that's who we are, and we can have all sorts of discussion about techne and technology and whatever. But the point is, the automobile and the squirrel, whatever, the deer, so forth, uh, they don't know how to interact with this technology. And when it comes to this first discussion of ours, voluntary learning, the X factor that I allude to would seem to be digital media, particularly video games and other stimuli. YouTube is great as men here in our age, that we can discipline ourselves to watch what we need and whatnot. This does to me, as and I've been doing since we spoke just some other research, and I'm coming across this with parents on the homeschool forums in real life IRL. Public school teachers are going nuts. I mean, there is a problem rising with this um crack. It's like crack cocaine. The students who are it's deliberate. We know this for 10 years. Even these devils in Silicon Valley. We love people from California, but these people in Silicon Valley, they're not all saints. They knew what they were doing, and they talked about this in their conferences, that they knew they were hitting that dopamine. And for children to have no regulation, what do we account? How do we account for? We want voluntary learning. We want to instill this desire. We want to preserve the child's wonder into a man, but how do we account for this fact that the telephone is like fentanyl for a child? And if I let the child do what he wants at any time before probably 25, he's just gonna watch who knows what. I mean, cartoons, whatever. I mean, how do we account for this? You see what I'm saying?
I do. No, this is probably the question for, the next few decades, because it is about, what are your screen rules in your house, and and I've seen great benefit of, complete self-directed learning, unschooling, and young people become masters at, let's say, Minecraft or Roblox or these things, and they learn the technology, and then they go on to design games and to write software and to work in that field. So although some parents are like, video games are a waste of time, they are to you because you don't like them. But me, I was a former, I was playing, I guess, Nintendo 64 and, GoldenEye and these kind of things. And I was in it, for a while. And I got interested in sports later. So I, threw away the controllers and I went outside and did outside stuff. And now young people, like you said, there's a dopamine, there's an addiction there. There's a book called Hooked, Hooked. Last name is Ehal, I think, Ehal, and it's about creating addictive products. And when I was living in the Silicon Valley, I actually went and met this gentleman, nice guy. He homeschools his kids, so he was talking about addictive products, but at the same time, he was homeschooling his kids. And I think, was it the one of the top guys at Facebook said he doesn't want his kids on Facebook. So yes, we can prevent children from getting online, but there's also kind of a pendulum effect there, or unintended consequence. When you restrict something, you make it more appealing. And this goes, even to like the Bible and other places. Like, you can eat of all the fruit in the garden except that tree. So it's like, well, why can't I do that one? So, the human wants what it can't have. Maybe this goes to dating as well. So I think to approach this problem of addictive devices, parents would be wise to speak truth to the son or daughter. And of course, if they're 3, 4, 5, maybe they don't even need a device. Let them go play, and maybe when they're 10 or 12 or something like that. Um, Love it or hate it, these devices seem to be the future, in terms of technology, video production, communication, work, presentation. It seems a very powerful tool. So it's not necessarily the phone that's the problem. It's not the internet that's the problem. It's how you view it. And I think it is smart to look at it as something can be used for good, and it can be used for harm, and to address these things that, hey, this can be addictive. And there was one interview, and I tried to find it, I lost it. There's an interview that I saw of a couple who was letting their, I want to say, 5 or 6-year-old watch a tablet, and the mom's cooking there in the kitchen, and then she hears this very adult-like advertisement going to the 6-year-old, and she looks over and it's like, what the heck, give me that. So she takes the tablet, and then she starts to sit down, tells the husband, hey, this advertisement, this adult inappropriate advertisement was on here. They're like, what? It was very dirty. And then they sat there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, trying to find this advertisement again, and it didn't pop up. They're like, okay, I guess it's gone forever. They gave it back to the 6-year-old child, and within about 5 minutes, the advertisement comes up again. And so the conclusion was that the device or the advertiser can target the face of a young person. So it was facially recognizing the young person. And these agendas, they are out there. The transgender agenda is out there to maim children and to, profit these terrible surgeons. I just can't believe these surgeons, can sleep at night, but they're making a lot of money. So they've sold their morality for money, as it seems. But there are examples of this, where there's negative messaging, negative advertising, and programmed subconsciously most of the time to get into the child's mind. And I think probably the best way, or at least one recommendation I have, is to speak truth to them. But if they're under 8 or 10, maybe they don't need a device. And this is, definitely space for a longer conversation, because it comes down to you, mom and dad. What do you value and what do you desire for your child? What are you after? What are you seeking? Hopefully it's a relationship based on trust, unconditional love, and absolute fulfillment of this experience. And these technologies and these devices do get in between these relationships. And then sometimes the children turn against their parents and say, oh, you guys, you can't say that, or, you're not allowed to do this. And the child's 12 or something, and the adult's been around for 30 or 40 years, and they pay for the rent and the food and everything. And you have this young person who's so convinced about this perspective, they're telling you how to live in your own house. And so it just turns the mother or the father against the children. And again, this is by design from the state. The state wants to take over your child's mind, in my view, because they don't want this parent in there. The concept is called parens patriae. That's a Latin phrase, that the state is the parent. And come to us. Don't go to your church. Don't go to your community. Don't go to your family, friends, grandmother, uncles, aunts, and neighbors. Come to the state, because we're going to take care of you. So those initiatives and intentions are out there. Again, I wish this wasn't true. I'm from Smallville, Northern California, and I just couldn't believe this stuff when I met John Gatto and Charlotte Isserbit and Anthony Sutton and these guys that I've read and communicated with. I'm like, wow, I never would have known that they see the human as a resource, a human resource, instead of a sacred soul, a holy being. Like this, as I see people, I see them as very special and unique and precious, not just something to put into the conveyor belt of schooling or the state agenda and squeeze out whatever is to be squeezed out, but to be free. So it is the device conversation, I think, will continue for many years, and the more perspectives, the better. I hope anybody who agrees or disagrees puts comments here on the video and begin the dialogue, because many parents are looking for the solution, and I have my perspectives, and you guys are all smart people out there, intelligent, and you have your own angles on the conversation, because I don't think it's a one-stop shop for this is the way it is, the age and the gender. Like, every person is different, and you kind of want to respond to their personality and their uniqueness in the best way you can.
Great. Thank you for that rejoinder there, David. And yes, it's a discussion that definitely needs to be had. I'm going to put you on the spot here. I don't suppose you've come across an old State of the Union. Sometimes it makes its presence in alien discussions. Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, he gave a very strange. No, it was Reagan for sure. It wasn't Bush. It was Reagan. He gave a very strange tangent in a State of the Union, where he said that, if space aliens came back to, speaking of California, right, Reagan from California, if space aliens came back right now, all the problems on the Earth would be solved. And it was an interesting hypothetical. And if you're into the aliens, maybe he was spilling the beans or not. That's another show for another day. But from our time in the past month, in my snooping around on the different forums and presentations and so forth, it really does seem that way. That without a real discussion of these devices, right, what's rising in the generation, and because their perception of reality seems to be completely different than previous generations, to the point that discipline does not work at all. There's Because I mean, because one's mental reality, most of one's day now is on these computers, and they've been raised from it. They don't have, like we have, some orientation before. And what's rising is almost a problem and a scenario and a world, which will make the, as I say, the denominational differences between public school and homeschool and unschool and wide school. It's going to make it, I think, seem trivial. I mean, the problem that's rising across the board. So there does need to be this discussion for certain, and this disciplining um, of one's individual. And that, I think, is an interesting point. Whether it's with the devices and moving back to the more general education conversation, it's not just the for the child devices or more general education in this first part of our conversation on self-directed learning and, as we call it, voluntary learning. But it's also having, as I see, bottomed out after 200 years of, skepticism of the institutions. Part of it too is the parents. It's not just a matter of disciplining the child to the proper use of the device or the proper use of books and learning, but it's also the adults. We have to relearn all this stuff too. And I have a certain background in churches myself, and with youth groups and things, and Sunday school. One of the things you'll notice is that children will not continue in the faith if their parents don't. If their parents just drop them off once a week, ordinarily speaking, naturally speaking, they will not continue. I'm just making a sociological point. And it struck me in my past month of research that this is exactly the problem that we're having with trying to instill learning in the younger generations, whatever their modality is that as adults, we have let our own hunger for knowledge and our own wonder and our own desire for voluntary learning, or rather, we haven't exercised that voluntary learning. And that's something that strikes me at this hour, and strikes me with some of the things you had said as well about that learning to have this conversation and this discipline.
Yeah. Well, I think of a Marcus Aurelius just because of the quote you brought him up, and I was thinking about him earlier. He says, "Don't speak about what a good man is, be one." And that's what I've come across in the last few years, especially last 5 years. You're trying to change the world by talking to people, but in reality, one of my other favorite quotes, I can't remember who said it, but he said, "Men learn from the university of example and no place else." So your children are watching you, mom and dad. And this is one of my curriculums I have in my homeschool leader Facebook group. I got about 20 of them that I've come up with, maybe 30 now, but um, it's called uh, Mom and Dad Start a Personal Learning Project. So whether in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, mom and dad, pursue your own learning project for your own interest, because you want to learn, you're interested in something. And whether you're reading, watching videos, writing, out interviewing people, out exploring stuff, businesses, museums, going to events, your child is going to like look up at you and say, "Hey, mom, what are you doing? Dad, what are you doing?" And she says, "I'm interested in finding the answers to this. I'm curious about this." And then, oh, so they're watching you pursue a interest, a question for its own reward. And so rather than saying, "Hey, kids, get off the devices, go read something, go learn something," it's inverted. And now you're going in pursuit of it. And you're saying, "Hey, come with me. I'm going to go pursue this learning project." And I think that's one of the best ways, because we can shout from the mountaintop, but then what's the quote? "Who you are speaks so loudly, I can't hear a word you say." And that happened to me too, from parents, right? I was spanked and disciplined and all these things. And I wanted to pursue questions with my parents and ask them and tell them all the truth. And I love them. I forgive them. We've had these conversations, now that I'm an adult. But by their strict disciplinism, I was forced to lie because I didn't want to get spanked. I didn't want to be grounded. So it was kind of a self-interest. But I've seen some of the unschooling parents who I really respect, and it's just this open space where you create safety for questions, you create safety for mistakes. Mistakes are not the problem. Fear of mistakes are one of the big problems. You must make errors in life in order to learn. And this is why the grade system in the school system is such an atrocity, in my opinion, because they say you got to get 9 out of 10 to be smart, 8 out of 10. 5 out of 10 is a failure, right? That's 50%. But in business and in sales, the real world, if you can be successful 5 out of 10 times, 50%, you're a rock star. Even in baseball, 30% batting average, that's Hall of Fame. But in the schooling ratio, 3 out of 10, you're a huge failure. So I think that's what it is. It's the man in the mirror question. And as soon as you start to pursue this endeavor, like I am, and some of the people, and probably you, John, and some of the people I love and respect, that's hard. When you're starting to change yourself, change your habits, self discipline seems to be the key to success. And the definition of self discipline is doing what you need to do when you need to do it, whether you feel like it or not. And you can do that as a child when you have all this open neuroplasticity and just possibility thinking versus in our later teens and 20s, and we kind of lose that flexibility of mind. And I think that's one of the strengths that the schools attack. They know the child is just this possibility, imaginative genius, anything's possible, versus this is the way it's done, this is the way that it's only going to continue. And the young people are the inventors. John Gatto taught me that normally, if you don't make a big scientific discovery by age 21 or 22, you're not going to do it, just because of the nature of things and imagination and creativity. So they try to squeeze it out, not have too many inventions. And then on the flip side, there's a documentary talks about free energy devices and UFOs. So it might be interesting for your listeners, called The Lost Century. And I'm open to the idea of, ETs being out there in space. I don't know what's going on. But he was talking about these from like 1940, 1960, 1980, all around the world, these devices that are up there floating in the space, and then they make no sounds, and they make these weird, fast moves, and gone without a noise. And so it covers some of the free energy technologies that have been around and some of the inventors and kind of a vision for the future. I'm like, man, if we could just get to free energy, then we wouldn't have to be out here slaving away for these dollars and these fiat currencies that the federal banks or Federal Reserve banks, central banks print. Just like you and I print a color copy from our printer, these guys are printing $100 bills in the hundreds of billions and trillions. So I think it is important that we look at imagination and freedom and also inventiveness, but it's going to come down to mom and dad demonstrating it, embodying that. And Booker T. Washington had a great quote, which was, "It's easier to raise strong children than it is to fix broken men."
That's a fine quote right there. And yes, I would just double down on what David here says, that it has to be led by example and genuine verbing example. I also like that other quote that, my verbs are so strong and my actions are so strong, I can't hear what you're saying.
Mhm.
And again, I guess that's part of this generation ourselves. I don't mean the kids coming up. I mean us and our elders too. Is it's easier to not read a book. I mean, the reading has fallen off a cliff in the past 20 years. Um, it's easier because it's boring as hell to read certain books, and yet we need to have that maturity. And as we move to our second stretch of our discussion, morality training, which is so necessary for the first discussion, for that voluntary learning. Um, Part of it, I think, is this maturity that we all need. And this is just the pendulum. This is life. No bad guys necessarily on the individual level. Although I think the devil's in Washington and New York and Silicon Valley. Maybe they have something to answer for. Um, but okay, whatever. It's easier to watch inanity on on TV, on the devices, whatever. We need to discipline ourselves just to realize there's a value in reading a boring ass book. I mean, okay, it's part of growing up. It's not everything. Like you said earlier, you had a good quote there too, about doing what we need to do, not what we want to do in the moment. That's
Yeah.
just part of individual life, part of a generation's time on this earth. Before we get to this idea of morality training, and I'd like you to define that, David. Um, this would be a good time, and I'll ask you to do this again. On maybe you can tell us some other things about it, but tell us some things on your website or whatnot to take a look for if we're new to your work, or some of your broadcasts, some of your interviews that you've done.
Yeah. So on my link tree there, you can see some of the interviews I've done, but I'm focusing right now on helping parents get their children out of the government schooling. So I do early high school graduations, I do consultations for homeschooling, I do enrollments as well. So maybe your child's not ready to graduate, but they're 8, 10, 12, and you want to get them enrolled. I do a virtual program and I can help you with some of the curriculum. These curriculum are available in the Facebook group. And I even want to talk a little bit about curriculum because these words are so confusing. And like you said, there's people profiting from these things. But my goal is to get the kids out, and hopefully we'll increase the reach as we develop the media intelligence and skills and all these things. But the word curriculum comes from the root word of course or path. So just like your fingerprints are unique to yourself, so is your child or children. Your children are very different from each other. You don't know the path your child's going to choose. And you are not their boss. You are their guide, their coach, their facilitator, their protector. But the course they choose is up to them. So one of the techniques for homeschool parents and people I teach is called strewing. This is where if you see your child has an interest, let's say in some kind of engineering, well, you don't have to force them down the path, but you can put some engineering magazines, engineering books, maybe some courses online or something. But curriculum is a path or a course. And the sooner that your son or daughter can begin to self direct and begin to choose their own path in life, the better, versus waiting until they're 18. And now it's like, hey, what are you going to do with your life? No, you can start asking these questions now, and you don't have to necessarily they don't have to know the answer. One of the best questions is, I don't know the answer to that. So when you're talking with your child, even the question, what do you want to do with your life? That's such a big question. Maybe they don't know the answer, because who would, right? The average adult, I think, goes through 6 to 10 different jobs and 4 to 5 different careers. There's large numbers where people do not know where they're going, and that's fine. What we want to know is, what do we want to do today? What is interesting to me today? What is exciting to me today? And then when you get clear on your values, you get clear on what you uh, treasure in this life, what you have an ideal for, now you're able to pursue those things in your own way. And again, embody that for your child, and then help them see that life is not about having a good job. Life is about having a good life. And this goes back to the morality question. So those are some places to go look at some of the work that I've done. And I customize all my consultations with parents to kind of uh, be flexible with your living situation. Sometimes parents are together, sometimes they're separated, sometimes grandpa's involved. Whatever it is, religious, non-religious, it's immaterial to me, because I think the essence is voluntary learning is what your child wants. It's what every person wants, really, is they want to expand, they want to grow. This is one of the 6 human needs, is growth and contribution. And once you start to figure out what you care about, what matters to you, now you can go find communities, you can find organizations that you actually want to help. And sometimes a lot of my relationships have been established through volunteering at these organizations, because I just appreciated what they're doing. I appreciate the mission, the leadership. And I would say, hey man, I would show up early or hang out late. How can I help? Is there some work I can do? And any organization that's doing anything, they can use volunteers. So, be sincere and be honest. And then later on, sometimes these organizations would pay you. They paid me sometimes, but that wasn't my point. My point was not to get the money from these people. My point was to be in relationship with these people, to help them with their mission, because I believe in what they're doing. And that's what I'll be doing here with the Gatto movement shortly, and with some of the stuff I'm doing. Gatto is GATTO, and that means get all the thinkers out of forced schooling. It's a huge goal. It's a huge dream. Maybe take 20 or 30 or 40 years. But hey, what are we doing here anyways? Let's all work together to empower the young people and get them on to some voluntary learning. So yeah, those are some of the links that people can reach out to. And I do offer a free 15-minute consultation that you can schedule, and we just do that for free. You can pursue the early graduation or some homeschool coaching.
Great. Thank you for that, David. And now we're going to transition to our second stretch here. We can always elaborate on this in the future. We're looking at morality training here. And just one thing you had mentioned, I wanted to recite the poem by Khalil Gibran, a Lebanese poet who came to America about a century ago. He wrote The Prophet, which was a very popular book of poetry. I think it still sells very well. But this is called On Children by Khalil Gibran. Lived in Boston for most of his life, in fact. Here we go. And a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have thoughts of their own. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backwards, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are set forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrow may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that makes it stable. That's Khalil Gibran's On Children, just to second what David had said here about the self-directed aspect of learning.
Mm-hmm. I actually came across that, I don't know, maybe since we spoke last, or maybe recently, the last few months myself. And I think the fact that he wrote that 100 years ago is genius. Your kids are not yours, but you're kind of this facilitator. He didn't use those words, but that's what I use, because I remember being this free spirit from a young age. And, our parents do the best that they can with the knowledge and awareness and consciousness that they have. So I don't hold it against them. I just see, okay, now it's for this next generation. They're going into a big sea of possibility. YouTube University is a huge possibility. Now the question is, what do you want to do? What is exciting to you? What do you care about? I mentioned in the previous show, a very successful mentor said, if you're looking for your purpose, find an injustice on the earth and spend your life trying to correct that injustice. And it keeps coming up. So I'm like, I just feel like that is such a solid part of myself that I'm grateful that he told me that, because that's what it is. It's like you want to do right. When you do right, you feel good. When you do badly, you feel badly. So, and this comes into the morality question.
Good. So, David, how would you define morality training? And how does that relate, especially to this self-directed learning, this voluntary learning?
I would say morality training is teaching people by your actions right from wrong. And we mentioned Aurelius, don't talk about it, do it. And before we do it, we do need to talk about it, and then we do need to think about it, right? This is where the philosophical conversation comes in, which is so important. And again, these schools, they don't address the significance of philosophy, which is what you know and how you hold what you know. So yeah, it's teaching others and young people specifically to do right and to know right from wrong by your own actions more than your words. And what I've concluded is that a moral action is anything that doesn't harm another person or their property. So an immoral action causes harm to a person or their property. Is very clear. And I'm glad we mentioned Lysander Spooner last conversation, because some people get confused with constitution and legal and government. And as Martin Luther King, I think it was St. Augustine, and all the smart people say, if a law is unjust, you have a moral obligation to disobey it. You know, many of these um, empires and dictatorships, everything was legal, right? But it wasn't moral. So I think this is the moral awakening that I'm talking about, and I've seen other people profess and teach. So it's helping young people know right from wrong. And if a child or a woman or elderly or even a man, you know, if someone's getting abused in front of you, you're not morally obligated to say something, but I would encourage you that, you know, maybe your spirit wants to say something at least. You know, you don't got to jump in and be Superman, but you know, for young people, maybe there is a moral obligation. You know, some little kids getting beat up in front of you, got to say something, and this is where moral courage comes into play. I think JFK might have said this one. He said, um, moral courage is more difficult than physical courage, meaning you can climb the mountain, you can slay the bear and face the beast in the wild, and even, you know, play football, you know, and get smashed by all these men. But to say what you really think, you know, or to speak truth in a room full of people who are not interested in truth, to speak up for the voiceless and the innocent when it's not politically correct, this is what time it is. This is now the time to say, hey, chopping up children's genitalia, I don't think that's good, you know, and I don't care what you think about me, it's not good. And the forced medicine and all these things. And so there's many of us, and now we're finding each other through these technologies. I'm so grateful we can have this live stream conversation to go get distributed out to the internet and the world, and you know, be viewed by anybody. Whereas in the past, you needed a television show, a radio show, a newspaper, something to get a message out. Or in the colonial days, you had to have a printer, and you would go print out pamphlets and you would pass out pamphlets. You know, that's a lot of groundwork. You know, I did some door-to-door sales in college, and that's not easy, you know. But I guess in that case, we were selling something. Here, you're just kind of giving out information. But the point is that the media landscape is changing, and it's time for us with these moral ideals and teaching the right from wrong to evolve. And there's one thing I want to mention, because you brought up a great point, which was people aren't reading as often, and even boring books they're not diving into. So I think with these technologies, it's going to be videos and even shorts and movies that they get these morals or ideals from, because they're not reading, but they're definitely watching. And the term that I like is called edutainment, education with entertainment. So that's what the, you know, the unrighteous ones are doing. They're using entertainment and incorporating all these non-traditional values, anti-family values, and they're making it, yeah, it's funny, ha ha, you know. And you'll notice, you know, I think you're probably around my age range and some of the other people, but like in television shows, it's been rare to see a strong father over the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's always Homer Simpson or Al Bundy, or, you know, there's a bunch of shows I don't watch, but I see the characters, and they're not some strong guy that is leading a family, you know, willing to protect his family. And so spreading morality through media and entertainment, I think, is one of the important things to do as well. And I am working on this movie project that you can get more details on my link tree as well. But we have the director, we got the script. All we need is the investor. So we have the platform now. We just need some financial support to get it out there. But even music, you know, you can spread morality through music, and, you know, you can get the message out. But the most important, I think, is parents look at themselves ask themselves, what is their moral code or compass? This is what I ask a lot of people, and a lot of it's online, and they don't have a code or compass. And I didn't either. I had to actually find this out. Like, what is a moral code? I had no idea. Oh, it's how you determine right from wrong. I was like, oh. So what we're taught through the state, school, and media is moral relativism, which is, oh, morality is different based on culture or religion or all these things. It's like, yeah, maybe some values or some morals, but the actual right from wrong, in my view, is very clear. You don't harm peaceful people or their property. If you do, you are aggressing against them. In libertarianism, they call it the non-aggression principle. And in some of my presentations, I call it respect for self-ownership, and that's a little bit more positive side. Rather than saying non-aggression, I say I respect your property, I respect your person, and because I respect you, I'm not going to harm you or your property or make any types of threats.
Yes, certainly. And if emulating and verbing, not just in front of the child, but as a part of one's life, the life of the mind is important for parents. If they really want their child to be self-directed learners, that if it's important that they verb learning and self-directed learning, it's doubly important that they verb morality and that they train themselves to morality, whether they're in public or with their children or by themselves. And that's a, again, part of this learning process. I've often said that the problem with contemporary schooling is the lessons that are not taught. I mean, there's all sorts of nonsense that's taught, and agreed. But I believe the deeper lessons are those things that are not instructed explicitly, vocally. And um, one of those, yes, I lost my train of thought there briefly. One of those is in high school, when I believe people have a certain spiritual and a mental opening, a certain window and creativity that accents that part of childhood, let's say, or growing up, whatever, and earlier parts. There are these windows that human beings have. But it's so interesting. One of the quiet lessons I believe that's taught in high schools is to fit in, is to fit in with the way the world is. I mean, there's a certain we don't have to get along with each other, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, well, this is the way the world works, and this is what you have to do, and you have to be on the conveyor belt, and everyone gets a job, and they go through the whole rigmarole till they retire and die, and that lesson, that unspoken lesson, is so loud in high school, and it's something that, speaking of morality training, this time of year, as everyone's finishing up, here in America at least, they're finishing up their school studies in high school and college, and we have all these valedictorian speeches, and that's probably the only time that people hear the word excellence, and they hear these very highfalutin speeches, and they're great speeches, and they're a lot of them are actually worth remembering. More of them aren't. More of them are phoned in, but excellence. I mean, when was the last time we've seen an adult verbing excellence, and an adult in front of a child, and that excellence was a real standard. That is, speaking of morality training, that is one that's lately struck me as I was meditating on these speeches and things we get this time of year.
Mm. It's so true. Yeah, it is. And sometimes you'll go to these schools and you'll see these quotes on the walls, and it's like, wow, this is a nice classroom. Wow, so nice. But the medium of their learning is coercive. So it's like, attitude of gratitude, or, I've even seen signs of excellence on the wall, but in practice, you got to get permission to urinate, to get a drink of water, in the real world, you and we are collaborating right now. In school, they might call this cheating. So this like the real world's about working together and cooperating, but in the school you got to, like, you can't even talk to your neighbor. So it's not a real thing, because in business, And organizations, even nonprofits, even churches, you need to work together with other people. And that is about communicating, stating goals, objectives, having some strategy, having some uh, conflict resolution skills. And we don't learn any of these things because I think they just want to push the children through to corporations, to the state, and consumerism, an absolute waste of their lives. So it's really bad that the word excellence hasn't been demonstrated by many people. And again, my mom was a public school teacher. I have family members that are in the system. I know there's good people in the system, but as Gatto says, the system is psychopathic. So you can't change the system. When he would have maybe 6 classes a day, he would close the door and he would say, I would have this class for like 45 minutes. And that was my laboratory to help them. And what he would do is he would help each student with the parents' permission. A lot of times he would go home and meet the parents and say, hey, your son or daughter's 12 or 13 years old, and we're doing this project, or excuse me, we're opening up the possibility for them to choose to do their own project, that they get to choose. I'll help them. And we're going to spend the next 7, 8 months doing this project, this one singular project for like an 8 month period, instead of different assignments every week, every day, like all this scatterbrain. Actually, no, let's put a project 8 months down the road and let's go pursue that thing with parent permission and student involvement. And they actually would sign a contract to do that. So it would be, kind of like an agreement, kind of like I don't know, a career agreement or something like that. But it was something that the student chose and the parents were on board with. And it's this, I think, is the future. It's like project learning, where your child gets to learn what they're studying and choose a big project. Maybe you do want to have a fashion show, or you want to write a book, or you want to hold a dance event or something that you love to do, something that excites you by the prospect of having a success. And it's strange. I was I think my late 20s, I took this transformational course. And long story short, it was like a 4 month program. And that's basically what they did. They're like, hey, choose any project for 4 months. And it doesn't matter what it is. We're going to show up weekly to give you some coaching and support. You got a little group. We're like 6 or 7 in a group, amongst a group of like 80 or 90 people. And there was this community of learning. And everybody had their own little things that they wanted to do. And by the end of that 4 months, I started the Education Options Expo. So that was the result, and that turned into 4 events and then a YouTube channel. And it was just something that really excited me. And you can do that too, mom and dad. You can set that up and pursue these longer term goals. And yeah, the morality is a longer question, because of like, we haven't learned these things. But begin asking people their moral code or moral compass, and be curious about it. I gave you my research and my conclusion, but again, if you have some other information that would be helpful, send it to me. Or there's other people in your community. Begin asking, hey, how do you determine right from wrong? What's your moral code? Oh, what do you guys believe over there? What do you value? And how do you demonstrate that? How do you put that into action? Because there's nobody coming to save us, save the children. It's mom and dads. And I know you guys are under pressure, just like all the rest of us, with inflation and increasing prices and all this, economic warfare that they have going on. But there are communities out there. My Facebook group is one. And I know John's community has some support too. But to sit there and do nothing is what they want. To say, uh-oh, just waiting for Superman to come save me. No, you got to get into action. And even if you take the wrong action or you make a mistake, that's actually better than doing nothing. So getting out there and making stuff happen, and meeting people, volunteering with people, taking leadership and initiative is one of the best ways that I've seen it happen. And it's been really helpful for me in my world.
Yeah, and just like learning, just like verbing morality. Yes, getting involved in the community. You mentioned that great vignette with John Gatto going to the parents, and I've been teaching in schools for 20 years now. I've been surprised how few times it happens, but how few times I've been invited over to people's houses for dinner. It's just this generation is not, and of parents is not used to this, and it's going to keep ebbing away as trends continue. So we have to take the bull by the horns. Community is work. Community is work. It's not fun. It's not candy. You have to labor at it, and that
Mhm.
means going out and meeting people. We're at the point right now here in Holy Connecticut where people don't even look at you on the street. You say hi to people, they look like you're like Freddy Krueger. You actually show some interest in somebody, some superficial interest. They look like little schoolboys. They look away from you. They're like little toddlers that hide behind their parents' legs. And I'm talking grown men, and this is going to continue. So if we're serious about educational renewal of a society which comes from learning, self-directed learning, morality, that is heavy work. And to David's earlier uh, nutshell of a saying that duty is doing what you don't want to do, etc., etc. Can I put you on the spot for that? Do you remember the specific wording of that?
Yeah, yeah. Self-discipline is doing what you need to do when you need to do it, whether you feel like it or not.
Great, thank you for that. And there we go. And part of that is just that maturation that we need. One thing that struck me at the beginning of your rejoinder there, David, is you mentioned the classroom with the beautiful posters, beautiful sentiments on the wall, at least, and the reality of the child who has to ask to talk and to pee and to do this and that and the other. And even that, I wonder, in a way that the teacher has no idea what's going on. They certainly would never will this thing. The child, nobody consciously even knows this. But even that, I wonder, is if it's part of the cognitive dissonance training that we get to enter the society. So the parallel I would make with that would be, Joe Blow driving around on the side of the road, and you have some stranger in a costume with a gun who so-called pulls you over, and they give you a contract called a ticket, and then you're in this cognitive dissonance world where I'm the land of the free, and a so-called officer, do I have to sign this? Oh no, you don't have to sign it. You can spend all night in jail if you're lucky, if I don't kill you. You don't have to sign it. You're in the land of the free. I mean, that's cognitive dissonance. You have to pay for everything. Good, that's a thing we're working on here, is getting a property. Good luck getting an attorney to admit that you can actually buy land. That's a whole other discussion. But almost nobody owns the land that they're on, even if they paid off their mortgage. And they're in this shoots and ladders world, and this monopoly land world. And I wonder if that doesn't start with these beautiful posters on a not so beautiful classroom.
I am about 99% certain that's exactly where it starts. And the question that I had, which I discovered later, which was, how come they didn't teach me about morality in school? Because kids are so honest and they're so brilliant and intelligent. If you taught the difference between right and wrong and coercive relationships and consensual relationships, you would have an 8-year-old in the second grade. It probably would have been me, or a handful of friends who I was hanging out with, and say, if coercion is wrong, why am I here? Or why can't I go to the bathroom? You're coercing me to stay here, and it would open up this can of worms that the institution couldn't handle. So basically, they don't even address morality or immorality. They just put that over there, to your point of what's not taught. Like they say, here's the curriculum: reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's what you need. But what we need is morality, because if your job requires you to harm peaceful people, you are being the criminal. And again, I have friends that are cops and sheriff deputies and these kind of things, but they're making 110, 150 grand a year. So, morality or a big house and an easy, comfortable life, So they've lost themselves, and I wish them peace and love and healing. But I would rather be without respect and trust amongst people versus 150 salary and a great pension, and be despised and hated and feared by people around me, and be afraid, have people be afraid of me because of my gun and my badge. So this is the bigger conversation, which I'm seeing at some of these freedom events when I'm going to, because it is a problem. They don't address morality in general. And yeah, if you're hurting peaceful people, you got to quit, man. And it will happen at some point. The dollar will collapse and the government will collapse. There's been no government that's lasted more than what, 250 years, 300 years, right? You have different governments that rise and fall and empires and things like that. So it's a cycle, and every government will end. And when they do, they're going to leave you enforcers out on the side of the road because you were being used as pawns. And I believe in the sacredness of all human life. So I see you guys all as kings and queens. But when you're obeying evil people for a paycheck, that makes you a pawn, and you're better than that. You really are. So we're going to evolve, not just a voluntary learning, but voluntary services, voluntary protection, voluntary firefighters. And, that's how it is. My hometown, they have a complete a volunteer firefighter team. And the chief makes a big amount of money, but it's all volunteer. But there's other places, the Threat Management Center out of Detroit, Michigan is a voluntary private security firm. If you're in Detroit, you don't call 911 because they don't show up. You call Dale Brown at Threat Management Center. You pay him $10 a month. He shows up within 5 minutes. He had body cams years ago, and the first 10 minutes are free. And every minute after that, whatever he's got to do to help you resolve your problem, he charges $1 a minute. And it's a very small amount to get quick safety and protection. He's been doing it for over 30 years now, and he's proven a voluntary model for police. And we can figure out all these things because you said it, man. They pull us over on the side of the road, force us into a contract, and this conversation will happen. We're going to develop more of these languaging, questioning frameworks because during the last 5 years, I was years, I was a right to travel activist. I'm not anymore, but I learned about the commercial capacity of a license, and that means you're using the public roads for a profit, such as a taxi driver, a FedEx driver, a bus driver, right? You need a license for those things. Anyways, I started exercising my rights, and as a result, I got confronted with cops, and I was exploring freedom and exercising my freedoms. And these cops, they didn't know about this because it's a big revenue source, tickets, fines, these types of things, registration, these are a big source of revenue. So I stopped doing that. But what I learned is that in order to have some self-respect, I don't want to bow down to these guys. So instead of saying license and registration, I say, if I don't do that, what are you going to do to me? And they'll say, oh, I'm going to arrest you, or I'm going to do this thing. I say, oh, if you're going to use violence against a peaceful guy, in that case, I will comply and I'll give him my identification. And if I'm lucky, I have my dash cam rolling on my car, or I'll have my phone video recording them as well. Because unfortunately, these guys, they don't have a moral code or compass, and they are going to be identified by the community because you have a thug out there extorting and forcing people into contracts unwittingly, maybe unknowingly. But just because you don't know that consent is the way and coercion is wrong, it doesn't mean you're allowed to commit coercion, right? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I'm not talking about codes and statutes. I'm talking about divine law, God's law, natural law, which is unchangeable. A law is something that cannot be changed, and it's always immoral to harm peaceful people or their property. Included in that would be to uphold your contract. So that would include property as well. So just the importance. I just want to share that little illusion because of what we're talking about, morality and the importance of it, and standing up, speaking it forth. And if you haven't seen the movie Gandhi from 1982, again, I can't remember how I came across that movie, but he talks about the morality and he says, I'm willing to die for the cause, but I'm not willing to kill for it. So I don't know if I'm there yet, but I do love freedom and I want to live and be, free and help young people be free. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some courageous men and women like that, even young people that want to get into the arena of morality and call out what is wrong and to stand up for the innocent, weak people who are being harmed, because violence is not the answer. I don't promote that. I promote non-cooperation with thuggery or non-violence in general. And maybe we'll have some more conversations about this in general, just because it's such an important conversation that needs to continue. And I appreciate we got to spend this time together, John.
Great. Thank you for that, David. And yes, well said. There's much to get into there, but you've been very generous with your time already. So we'll not belabor the point. There's much to get into with the legal stuff for sure and certain, and how you get a little boy or a little girl and get them into being a clown of 30 or 40 years of age in a costume threatening people. That a lot of that has to do with how knowledge is disseminated, which is most appropriate to our discussion on learning here, voluntary learning, morality training as well. COVID-19, this is not abstract anymore. A lot of us were warning about these potential. COVID-19 is the master class in exactly what a lot of educational critics were saying. This is the society you produce. And it's not that men will sell their souls, it's just how cheap they'll sell them for. I mean, Dr. Fauci, who has millions of men's blood on his hands, wounded tens of millions more. That bastard's a professor at Georgetown. That was the price of his soul. The price of his soul was, very cheap. A couple of years of adulation in the press and some forgettable position in some spook factory. All right. Well, like David here says, my final point here, like David says, okay, keep your, your six-figure income or whatever they call it, and their money that devalues all the time. Hope you can sleep well. Like Patrick Henry says, right? Let your chains sit lightly. Go freely. May your chains sit lightly. Much to be said there. And hopefully we'll have much more coming from David down the line here. So anyway, thank you, sir, for your insights. David James Rodriguez. We have the link tree down below the description, as well as the bubble here. Check that out. And anything else you want to bring up, David? Anything, any interviews you have coming up, podcasts, programs, especially with that time of the year when we're thinking as teachers and things, we're thinking about the autumn. Anything you want to bring up as we knock off?
Yeah, I'm working on the homeschool group coaching program, so that it can be affordable for parents out there that are serious about homeschooling. And this is the year, more and more parents want to do it, but they don't have confidence to do it. So you can email me at djrodriguez1@proton.me, or go to homeschoolleader.com. We'll have the coaching program up. The Facebook group also, Homeschool Leader. You can join that. We'll put some announcements in there. But I think it's that time, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, friends and family, to begin taking the education of your sons and daughters seriously, to know that there are these agendas out there destroying the values that you've instilled, destroying the relationships that you've worked on. You've birthed this child and now you've handed it to the state, and now it's time to take it back. And I can help you do that. So we're working on that program. I have free content as well on the Education Options TV channel, YouTube. And those are some of the main places to find me. So yeah, look out for the homeschool group coaching program this summer. And this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you, John, and what you're doing, and look forward to having more conversations because the truth is rising. I just want to share one last thing here. This past weekend, I was down in the Bay Area visiting because my friend and amazing artist, Grant Presence, had a couple shows, and I was able to do some comedy during those shows. And I think getting into the art, the edutainment. He's using music to speak truth. I'm using comedy, and we're trying to get this truth out there so that we can laugh, as Oscar Wilde taught us, and some of these other people to make it even like J.R. Tolkien in Lord of the Rings. I don't know if you know, he was actually voluntarist as well. So he believed in voluntary relationship, and his metaphor was the ring of power being thrown into the volcano was that nobody needs power over each other. We're all equal and everything needs to be voluntary. And I would say that is absolutely true, especially for learning and for the children. And they are the future, and we want to empower them with morality, with voluntary learning, and all these great ideals that we discussed on this show. So yeah, it's been an honor to be with you, John, and your audience members. You guys are, if you listen to this channel, you guys know what's going on. So stay tuned, and we look forward to having more shows together.
Great, David. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to the audience as you joined us for this discussion here on voluntary learning and morality training. Indeed, we will catch you, both of us, down the line here. Thank you so much and have a good day.